The roar started as a whisper in the mountains above, then grew into the thunder that would change two lives forever on that bitter January morning in 1881. Willa Wright pressed her mare forward along the narrow trail that cut through the San Juan Mountains of Colorado, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. She had been foolish to attempt this journey alone, but desperation left little room for wisdom. Her father lay dying in Silverton, and she had traveled from her teaching position in Durango without waiting for safer weather or proper escort. The telegram had been clear: come now or risk never seeing him alive again. The snow had started falling an hour ago, fat flakes that stuck to her eyelashes and transformed the world into a blur of white. Her hands, even wrapped in wool gloves, had gone numb on the reins. The trail ahead narrowed further, hugging the mountainside with a steep drop to her right that disappeared into swirling snow. She should have turned back, but turning back meant another day lost. Another day her father might slip away without her there to hold his hand and tell him she forgave him for all the years of silence after her mother's death. The sound came without warning. A crack like a rifle shot echoed through the mountains, followed by that terrible roar. Willa looked up and her heart stopped. A wall of white was bearing down from above, a massive section of the snowpack breaking free and cascading toward her with murderous speed. Her mare screamed and reared. Willa barely kept her seat, jerking the reins to turn the horse, but there was nowhere to go. The narrow trail offered no escape, and the Avalanche was moving faster than any horse could run. Time seemed to slow as she stared at her death approaching, all sound drowned out by the roar that filled the world. Then a hand grabbed her waist, and she was flying sideways, torn from her saddle by an iron grip. She caught a glimpse of a man on a powerful bay horse, his face set in fierce concentration beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He had one arm locked around her middle as he spurred his horse away from the trail, away from the Avalanche, cutting across the slope at an angle that seemed suicidal. "Hold on," he shouted against her ear, and Willa wrapped her arms around his neck as they plunged through deep snow. The Avalanche hit the trail where she had been seconds before, consuming her mare and everything else in its path. The terrible sound enveloped them, and snow began to rain down around them as the outer edge of the slide caught them. The bay horse stumbled, nearly going down, but the man's strong legs and expert hands kept the animal upright and moving. They crashed through a stand of pines, branches tearing at Willa's coat and face. The man steered them behind a massive boulder that jutted from the mountainside, and they huddled there as the Avalanche roared past, the ground shaking beneath them. Snow poured over the boulder's top, burying them in white, but the rock held firm and protected them from the deadly river of snow and ice. Then silence fell, profound and shocking after the terrible noise. Willa realized she was trembling violently, pressed against the chest of a complete stranger, his arms still locked around her. They were covered in snow, half buried against the boulder, but they were alive. "Are you hurt?" The man's voice was rough but concerned. He shifted his grip, helping her sit up in the snow. His horse stood nearby, sides heaving, steam rising from its coat. Willa tried to speak, but her teeth were chattering too hard. She shook her head instead, then looked toward where the trail had been. Nothing but churned snow remained, a scar carved into the mountainside where tons of snow and ice had ripped away everything in their path. Her mare was gone. If this man had not appeared when he did, she would be buried beneath that snow, dead or dying in the cold darkness. "We need to move," the man said, pulling himself to his feet. "That slide might trigger others, and we are too exposed here." He was tall, Willa noticed as he helped her stand, with broad shoulders and strong features weathered by sun and wind. His eyes were gray, steady and calm despite what they had just survived. A day's worth of stubble covered his jaw, and his clothes were the rough canvas and wool of a working cowboy, his chaps scarred from hard use. He looked to be perhaps 28 or 30, though it was hard to tell with men who lived their lives outdoors. "Can you ride?" he asked, already moving toward his horse. "I think so," Willa managed through chattering teeth. He swung into the saddle, then reached down and pulled her up behind him with surprising ease. Willa wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing close for warmth and stability. Through his coat, she could feel the solid strength of him, the steady rhythm of his breathing. "My name is Dalton Ellis," he said over his shoulder as he turned his horse away from the Avalanche site. "There is a line shack about 2 miles from here. We can shelter there until the weather clears." "Willa Wright," she replied. "I need to get to Silverton. My father is dying." Dalton glanced back at her, and she saw sympathy in those gray eyes. "I am sorry about your father, Miss Wright, but the passes will be closed after that slide. Nobody is getting to Silverton today or tomorrow. Best we can do is get to shelter before we both freeze to death." Willa wanted to argue, wanted to demand he take her to her father, but the cold was seeping deep into her bones and her soaked clothes were already starting to stiffen. She nodded against his back and held on as he guided his horse across the mountainside. The ride to the line shack was a blur of white and cold. Dalton's horse plowed through snow that sometimes reached its chest, but the animal was strong and kept moving. Willa lost feeling in her feet and hands, and her face burned from the cold. She focused on breathing, on holding on to Dalton, on simply surviving the next minute and then the next. When the small cabin finally appeared through the snow, she barely registered it. Dalton dismounted and pulled her down, and she nearly collapsed when her frozen legs tried to support her weight. He caught her easily, one arm under her knees and the other behind her back, carrying her to the cabin door as though she weighed nothing. The cabin was rough and small, built for cowboys to use during summer cattle drives through the high country. A single room with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed, a rough table and chairs, and shelves holding supplies. Dalton kicked the door shut behind them and set Willa in one of the chairs. "I need to tend my horse," he said. "There is a lean-to shed out back. Do not try to start a fire until I return. You are too frozen, and I will not risk you setting yourself or the cabin ablaze." He was gone before Willa could respond, leaving her sitting in the dim, cold interior. She tried to move her fingers, but they were stiff and unresponsive. Her feet hurt with a deep ache that made her gasp. She knew about frostbite, knew that the cold could steal fingers and toes if they did not warm them properly. Dalton returned quickly, bringing a blast of cold air with him before he shut the door firmly. Snow clung to his shoulders and hat, and his face was reddened from the wind, but his movements were quick and efficient as he built a fire in the hearth. He had the kindling and wood arranged in minutes, and soon small flames were licking upward, growing steadily. "We need to get you out of those wet clothes," he said without looking at her. "There should be some old blankets in the chest under the bed." He retrieved the blankets, dusty but dry, and handed them to her. Then he turned his back, facing the wall, giving her privacy. Willa's frozen fingers fumbled with the buttons of her coat, struggling with the simple task. After a minute, she made a small sound of frustration. "I cannot manage the buttons," she admitted, hating the weakness in her voice. Dalton turned back and knelt in front of her chair. His touch was gentle and efficient as he worked the buttons free, helping her out of her coat and then the heavy wool dress beneath. He kept his eyes on his work, never letting his gaze wander inappropriately, treating her with a respect that surprised and touched her. When she was down to her undergarments, he wrapped her in the blankets and moved her chair closer to the fire. Then he removed his own coat and hung it near the flames to dry alongside her clothes. "Wiggle your fingers and toes," he instructed, settling into the other chair. "The pain will get worse before it gets better, but we need to get circulation back." Willa did as he said, gasping as fierce, tingling pain shot through her hands and feet. Dalton watched her carefully, checking her fingers and toes for signs of serious frostbite. His hands were warm and steady as he examined her, and Willa found herself studying his face in the firelight. He had strong features, a straight nose that looked like it had been broken at least once, and those calm gray eyes that seemed to notice everything. "Why did you do it?" she asked suddenly. "Why did you risk your life to save me?" Dalton looked up from examining her feet, meeting her eyes. "I saw you on the trail from higher up the mountain, saw the snow starting to crack. There was not time to shout a warning, so I rode down to get you out of the way." "But you could have been killed. You nearly were killed." "So could you," he pointed out. "Would you have preferred I let you die?" "No, but I do not understand why you would risk everything for a stranger." Dalton was quiet for a moment, still holding her foot in his warm hands. When he spoke, his voice was serious. "My sister died 5 years ago. She was traveling alone through the mountains when her wagon went off the trail in a storm. Nobody stopped to help her. Nobody even tried. I found her 3 days later when I went looking." He paused, his jaw tightening. "Since then, I have made it my business to help folks in trouble when I can. The mountains are dangerous enough without people turning their backs on each other." "I am sorry about your sister," Willa said softly. Dalton nodded and released her foot, settling back in his chair. "You are lucky. No serious frostbite, though you will be sore for a few days. What possessed you to travel alone in winter?" Willa pulled the blankets tighter around herself. "I received a telegram yesterday. My father is dying in Silverton. I had to come." "From Durango?" "Yes, I teach at the schoolhouse there." "And you have no other family? No husband or brother to make the journey with you?" "My mother died when I was 16. My father and I have not spoken much since then. He blamed himself, I think, and could not bear to look at me because I resembled her too much. But he is still my father, and I cannot let him die alone." Her voice cracked on the last words. Dalton leaned forward, his expression kind. "We will get you to Silverton as soon as the pass is clear. I know these mountains. I have been working cattle up here for 10 years. If there is a way through, I will find it." "Why would you do that for me? You already saved my life once." He held her gaze, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "Because you are worth it, Miss Wright." The simple statement, spoken with such quiet conviction, hit Willa harder than she expected. When was the last time anyone had suggested she was worth something? The children she taught valued her, yes, but most of the townsfolk saw her as a spinster schoolteacher, useful but unremarkable. Her father had pushed her away after her mother's death, unable to cope with his grief. She had learned to stand alone, to need no one, because needing people only led to disappointment. But this stranger, this cowboy who had risked his life without hesitation, looked at her as though she mattered, as though her life had value beyond utility. "Thank you," she whispered, not trusting herself to say more. The storm raged outside as the afternoon wore into evening. Dalton found beans and coffee in the cabin supplies and prepared a simple meal over the fire. They ate in companionable silence, and Willa felt warmth slowly returning to her body. Her clothes steamed near the fire, still too wet to wear, but the cabin was growing warmer by the hour. "Tell me about teaching," Dalton said as they finished eating. "What made you choose that path?" Willa considered the question. "My mother was a teacher. She loved books and learning, and she passed that love to me. After she died, teaching felt like a way to keep her alive, to honor what she valued. The children give me purpose, I suppose." Do you enjoy it? Most days. Some of the children are bright and eager, which makes the work rewarding. Others are there because their parents force them, and those days can be challenging. But yes, I enjoy it more often than not. A teacher needs to be patient and kind, Dalton observed. Those are rare qualities. You do not know me well enough to say whether I possess those qualities or not. I saw how you handled yourself during the avalanche, he replied. No screaming or hysterics, just focus on surviving. And I see how you speak about your students, about your father. You have every reason to be bitter about your father's distance, but instead, you traveled alone through dangerous country to be with him. That speaks to your character. Willa felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. You are very observant, Mr. Ellis. Dalton, please. An observation keeps a man alive in the mountains. Then you must call me Willa. He smiled at that, and the expression transformed his face, making him look younger and less careworn. Willa it is. As darkness fell outside, the reality of their situation became clear. They were sharing a cabin with only one bed, and Willa's clothes would not be dry enough to wear until morning. Dalton seemed to recognize her discomfort because he stood and pulled the blankets from the bed. You take the bed, he said. I will sleep by the fire. I cannot take the only bed while you freeze on the floor. I have slept on harder ground than this cabin floor, and I will be warm enough by the fire. Besides, you nearly died today. You need proper rest. Willa wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a tide. The narrow bed looked impossibly inviting. Thank you, Dalton. She settled onto the bed, wrapped in her blankets, and watched as Dalton arranged his own bedroll near the fire. He moved with the easy competence of a man accustomed to making camp in rough conditions. Within minutes he was settled, his hat pulled low over his eyes, apparently ready to sleep despite the hard floor. Dalton, Willa called softly into the darkness. Yes. Why did you really save me? You could have been killed. Your horse could have been killed. Most men would not have taken that risk for a stranger. There was a long silence. Then Dalton pushed his hat back and looked at her across the dim cabin, the firelight casting shadows across his face. I told you about my sister. That is part of it. But the fuller truth is that I saw you on that trail, saw you riding alone through the storm, and I thought to myself that you must be either very brave or very desperate. Either way, you deserved a chance to reach wherever you were going, deserved to live. Some people are worth saving, Willa. You are one of them. You cannot know that. You do not know me. I know enough. I know you risked your life to see your father. I know you dedicated your life to teaching children. I know you faced down an avalanche without falling apart. That is enough for me. Willa's throat tightened with emotion. I think you might be a better man than most I have known, Dalton Ellis. I am just a cowboy who was in the right place at the right time. Now get some sleep. We have a hard journey ahead once this storm clears. But Willa lay awake long after Dalton's breathing deepened into sleep, staring at the rough wood ceiling and thinking about the man who had saved her life. There was something solid about him, something steady and true that called to something deep inside her. She had learned long ago not to rely on anyone, not to let anyone get close enough to hurt her. But Dalton had already broken through her defenses simply by risking everything to pull her from the path of the avalanche, and by treating her with a respect and kindness that felt like water in a desert. She finally drifted off to sleep with those thoughts swirling through her mind, and her dreams were filled with gray eyes and strong hands, and the memory of his voice saying she was worth saving. Morning brought clearer weather, though the cold was fierce. Willa woke to find her clothes dry and folded neatly on the chair near the fire, and Dalton already outside tending to his horse. She dressed quickly, grateful for the privacy, and was examining the meager food supplies when he returned with an armload of firewood. "Storm has passed, but the passes will still be dangerous," he reported, stacking the wood near the hearth. "We should wait another day for conditions to improve." "Another day?" Willa felt panic rise in her chest. "I cannot wait another day. My father might not have another day." Dalton set down the last of the wood and turned to face her. "I understand your urgency, Willa, but it would be suicide to try the passes now. The avalanche yesterday will have left the snowpack unstable. Any loud noise or heavy weight could trigger more slides. We wait until tomorrow, leave at first light, and I will get you to Silverton safely. But if we leave today, we will likely both end up buried under tons of snow." Willa wanted to argue, wanted to demand they leave immediately, but she could see the logic in his words. Dalton knew these mountains far better than she did, and if he said the passes were too dangerous, she had to trust his judgment. He had already saved her life once. She had to believe he would not prevent her from reaching her father without good reason. "Another day, then," she agreed reluctantly. "But we leave at dawn tomorrow, regardless of conditions." "At dawn," Dalton confirmed. "I promise." They spent the day in the cabin, venturing out only when necessary. Dalton occupied himself with various small tasks, repairing a weak spot in the cabin wall and checking his gear. Willa found an old book on the shelf, a battered copy of Charles Dickens that had clearly been read many times, and settled by the fire to read. "That is mine," Dalton said when he noticed the book. "I left it here last summer in case I needed to spend time at the cabin again." "You read Dickens?" Willa could not keep the surprise from her voice. "You thought cowboys do not read?" "I suppose I did not think about it one way or another." Dalton smiled slightly. "My mother was a great believer in education. She made sure both my sister and I learned to read and write properly. After she and my sister died, reading became a way to hear my mother's voice again, to remember the evenings she would read to us by lamplight." "Both your mother and sister are gone?" Willa asked gently. "Mother died of fever when I was 20. My sister, Emily, followed 5 years later in the accident I told you about. My father drank himself to death 2 years after my mother passed. So yes, I am alone now." The quiet pain in his voice made Willa's heart ache. She understood that particular loneliness, the feeling of being untethered in the world. "I am sorry. That is too much loss for one person to bear." "We all bear what we must," Dalton replied. "But it taught me the value of human connection, of not taking people for granted. That is why I could not leave you to die on that mountain. Life is too precious and too short to waste." They talked through the afternoon, sharing stories of their lives. Willa told him about her students, about the little girl who struggled with reading until Willa discovered she had poor eyesight and needed spectacles, about the boy who came to school hungry, and how Willa had started keeping extra food in her desk for him. Dalton told her about working cattle in the high country, about sleeping under the stars and waking to find elk grazing nearby, about the satisfaction of honest hard work and the freedom of the open range. "You work for one of the big ranches?" Willa asked. "I work for the Double Bar Ranch outside of Durango," Dalton said. "Or I did. I am actually heading back there now after spending the winter at a line camp further north. The ranch owner is a fair man, pays decent wages and treats his men right." "Durango? Then you live in the same town as me." "I do, though I spend most of my time in the mountains with the cattle. I am only in town a few times a year." The realization that they lived in the same town, that their paths might have crossed if circumstances had been different, struck Willa as significant somehow. As though fate had brought them together on that mountain trail for a reason beyond simply saving her life. As evening approached, Dalton prepared another simple meal. They ate together, their conversation flowing easily now that they knew each other better. Willa found herself laughing at Dalton's story about a young horse that had developed a taste for coffee and would steal it from unsuspecting cowboys. "I have not laughed like this in a long time," she admitted when the story ended. "You should laugh more often. It suits you." Willa felt that same flush of warmth his compliments seemed to bring. She was not accustomed to male attention, had long ago accepted that her life would be solitary. But Dalton looked at her as though she was beautiful, as though her company was something he valued. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. That night, as she lay in the narrow bed and listened to Dalton breathing near the fire, Willa admitted to herself what she had been avoiding all day. She was falling for this cowboy who had saved her life. It was foolish and premature and completely irrational, but her heart seemed to have its own ideas about what was sensible. Dalton was kind and brave and strong, but more than that, he saw her. Really saw her, not as a schoolteacher or a spinster or someone's daughter, but as a person with value and worth. And when this was over, when he delivered her safely to Silverton, and she said goodbye to her dying father, what then? Would Dalton simply ride away back to his cattle and his mountains? And would she return to Durango and her schoolhouse? And would they become nothing more than a story, each of them told about that time they survived an avalanche? The thought made her chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. Morning came too quickly. Willa woke before dawn to find Dalton already up, preparing for their journey. He had made coffee and warmed the last of the beans, and they ate a quick breakfast in the pre-dawn darkness. "The way to Silverton is dangerous even in good conditions," Dalton explained as they prepared to leave. "We will need to take it slow and careful. I will lead, you stay close behind me, and if I tell you to do something, you do it immediately without question." "Understood. Understood. Good." "We are going to make it, Willa. I will get you to your father." They set out as the sky was just beginning to lighten, a rosy glow spreading across the snow-covered peaks. Dalton's bay horse carried them both again, plowing through snow that was sometimes chest-deep on the animal. Dalton picked their route carefully, avoiding steep slopes and areas where cornices hung precariously over drops. The journey was tense and exhausting. Every sound made Willa's heart race, fearing another avalanche. But Dalton seemed to have an instinct for the mountains, sensing danger before it manifested and steering them away from hazardous areas. They stopped frequently to let the horse rest, and during those stops, Dalton would scan the mountains around them, reading the snow and the slopes with an expertise born of long experience. "You really do know these mountains," Willa observed during one such stop. "I have worked them for 10 years. Lost a friend to an avalanche in my second year, and I swore I would learn everything I could about mountain safety after that. Snow is beautiful, but it is also a killer if you do not respect it." By midday they had made good progress, and Silverton was visible in the valley below, a collection of buildings clustered around the mines that had drawn so many people to this remote corner of Colorado. Willa's relief was palpable, but it was mixed with dread. She was close to her father now, but what would she find when she arrived? Was he still alive? Would he even want to see her? As though sensing her thoughts, Dalton reached back and squeezed her hand where it rested against his waist. "Whatever happens with your father, you will handle it. You are strong enough. How can you be sure? Because you are here, aren't you? You faced an avalanche and 2 days in a mountain cabin with a stranger and you never broke. You will face this too." They reached Silverton in the late afternoon, riding down the main street as miners and townspeople paused to watch them pass. Dalton stopped in front of the small hotel. "Where would your father be staying?" he asked. "The doctor sent the telegram." He is probably at the doctor's office or the hotel." Dalton dismounted and helped Willa down. Her legs were stiff from the long ride and she stumbled slightly. He caught her elbow, steadying her. "I will come with you," he said. "You do not have to, you have already done so much. I said I would get you to Silverton safely, and that means making sure you actually reach your father. Come on." They found the doctor's office 2 buildings down from the hotel. A sign in the window read, "Dr. James Monroe, physician and surgeon." Dalton opened the door and ushered Willa inside. The office was warm and smelled of carbolic and medicine. A gray-haired man in a vest and rolled shirt sleeves looked up from a desk covered in papers. "Can I help you? I am Willa Wright. You sent me a telegram about my father, Edward Wright." The doctor's expression shifted to one of sympathy and something like relief. "Miss Wright, thank God you made it. We were worried the telegram might not reach you in time or that the weather would prevent you from traveling. Your father is upstairs. He has been asking for you." "He is still alive then?" Willa felt tears prick her eyes. "Yes, though he is very weak. His heart is failing, Miss Wright. I do not think he has long, but he has held on with remarkable determination. I believe he was waiting for you." Willa looked at Dalton, and he gave her an encouraging nod. "Go to him. I will wait here." The doctor led Willa upstairs to a small room where her father lay in a narrow bed. Edward Wright had always been a large man, strong and vital, but the figure in the bed was a shadow of what she remembered. His face was gray, his breathing labored, his once powerful frame wasted by illness. "Papa," Willa moved to his bedside, taking his hand. His eyes opened, struggling to focus, and then he saw her. "Willa, you came. Of course I came. You are my father." "I thought you might not," he whispered. "I pushed you away after your mother died. I was cruel. You were grieving. We both were. That is no excuse. You needed me and I turned my back on you. I have regretted it every day since, but I was too much of a coward to reach out to try to fix what I broke. Can you forgive a foolish old man?" Tears streamed down Willa's face. "There is nothing to forgive, Papa. I am here now. That is what matters." They talked for hours, her father drifting in and out of consciousness but always coming back to her. He told her about her mother, about how they had met and fallen in love, about how proud he was of Willa for becoming a teacher, about how he had followed her life from a distance, too ashamed to contact her directly, but always watching to make sure she was safe and happy. "I am sorry I did not give you the life you deserved," he said as darkness fell outside the window. "I should have been a better father. You were a good father before Mama died. I have those memories and I will treasure them always. You are so like her, kind and strong. She would be proud of the woman you have become." He paused, his breathing more labored. "Do not make my mistakes, Willa. Do not push away the people who matter. Love is too precious to waste on pride and fear." "I will remember that, Papa." "Promise me you will find someone to share your life with. Promise me you will not end up alone like I did." "I promise." Her father squeezed her hand weakly. "Good girl. I can rest now, knowing you will be all right." His eyes closed and his breathing grew slower and more irregular. Willa sat with him through the night, holding his hand, telling him she loved him, telling him it was all right to let go. As dawn light began to filter through the window, Edward Wright took one last shallow breath and was gone. Willa sat for a long time in the quiet room, holding her father's still warm hand, feeling grief and relief war within her. Grief for all the years they had lost, relief that they had been able to reconcile before the end, that she had been able to tell him she forgave him, and he had been able to die in peace. When she finally went downstairs, she found Dalton asleep in a chair in the doctor's waiting room, his hat pulled low over his eyes. He had waited all night. The realization made her chest tighten with emotion. She touched his shoulder gently. "Dalton." He woke instantly, straightening in the chair. One look at her face told him what had happened. "I am sorry, Willa. He is at peace now. We were able to talk, to make our peace with each other. That is more than I dared hope for." She paused. "Thank you for waiting. Where else would I be?" The simple question held layers of meaning that Willa was not quite ready to unpack. Instead, she said, "I need to make arrangements. The funeral, settling his affairs. I do not know how long I will need to stay in Silverton. I will stay too as long as you need me. But your job, the ranch, can wait a few days. You should not be alone right now." Dalton was true to his word. Over the next 3 days, he stayed by Willa's side as she navigated the painful process of burying her father and dealing with his affairs. Edward Wright had owned a small house in Silverton and had left everything to Willa. It was not much, but it was more than she had expected, more than she felt she deserved after their years of estrangement. The funeral was small, just Willa, Dalton, the doctor, and a few of her father's acquaintances from town. They buried him in the Silverton Cemetery on a hillside overlooking the valley. The day was clear and cold, the mountains sharp and bright against the blue sky. As the gravediggers filled in the grave, Willa stood with Dalton's solid presence beside her, grateful beyond words that he was there. She had prepared herself to face this alone, as she faced everything alone, but having him there made it bearable. That evening they sat in her father's house, sorting through his possessions and deciding what to keep and what to dispose of. Willa found herself opening up to Dalton in ways she never had with anyone else, sharing memories of her mother, talking about her complicated feelings regarding her father, speaking honestly about her fears and hopes for the future. "What will you do now?" Dalton asked as they worked. "Will you keep the house here or sell it and return to Durango?" "I do not know yet. I suppose I should return to Durango. My students need me and I have built a life there such as it is. But part of me wants to stay here, where my parents are buried, where I have some connection to family." "Family is important," Dalton agreed. "But so is building your own life, making your own choices. You do not have to decide right away." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, and then Willa said, "You have been incredibly kind to me these past days. More than kind. I do not know how to thank you properly." "You do not need to thank me." "Yes, I do. You saved my life, you stayed with me, you waited all night at the doctor's office, you stood beside me at my father's funeral even though you never knew him. You have been more of a friend than anyone has been in years, and I need you to know that it matters to me. You matter to me." Dalton set down the box he had been sorting through and crossed the room to where Willa sat. He knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands in his. "You matter to me too, Willa, more than you probably realize. These past few days with you have been some of the best I have known in a long time. You are smart and strong and kind, and being around you makes me want to be a better man. You are already a good man. I am a cowboy with no family and no real prospects beyond wrangling cattle in the mountains. You are an educated woman, a teacher. You could do better than someone like me." Willa felt something crack open in her chest, something that had been locked tight for years. "Do you think that matters to me? Your occupation or your prospects? You risked your life to save mine. You have been patient and respectful and supportive. You see me, Dalton, really see me not as a teacher or a spinster or anything other than just me. Do you know how rare that is? How precious?" "Willa," his voice was rough with emotion. "When you pulled me from that avalanche and I asked why, you said because I was worth it. But do you know what I realized? You are worth it too. You are worth risking for, worth caring about, worth—" She hesitated, then plunged ahead. "Worth loving." Dalton's eyes widened. "Are you saying—" "I am saying that I have fallen in love with you, Dalton Ellis." I know it is too fast and probably foolish, and I have no right to expect you to feel the same way. But I promised my father I would not let fear keep me from love, and so I am telling you the truth." For a moment, Dalton just stared at her, and Willa felt her heart sink. She had misread the situation, had let herself believe that his kindness meant something more than simple human decency. But then he smiled, a wide, genuine smile that transformed his face, and he pulled her down from the chair and into his arms. "Foolish," he said against her hair. "Willa, I have been falling for you since I saw you sitting on that horse in the middle of a snowstorm, so determined to reach your father that you were willing to risk everything. I love your courage and your kindness, and the way you care about people even when they have hurt you. I love the way you talk about your students and the way you faced your father's death with such grace. I love you, Willa Wright, and I would be honored if you would let me be part of your life." Willa pulled back just enough to look up at him. "Are you sure? I am not easy to live with. I am stubborn and independent, and I have been alone for so long that I might not be good at being part of a pair. Then we will learn together. I am not exactly an expert at relationships myself, but I know that what I feel for you is real and worth fighting for." He paused, his expression turning serious. "Marry me, Willa. Come back to Durango with me, or stay here in Silverton, or we will go somewhere else entirely. I do not care where we end up as long as we are together. You are proposing already. I am 30 years old, and I have spent the last 5 years alone, thinking I would never find someone who understood me, who made me want to build a life instead of just surviving. Now I have found you, and I am not fool enough to let you slip away. So yes, I am proposing. Will you marry me?" Willa felt joy bubbling up inside her, bright and effervescent. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." Dalton kissed her then, and it was sweet and perfect and felt like coming home after a long journey. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and smiling, Willa realized that everything had changed. The loneliness that had defined her life for so long was gone, replaced by the promise of a future with someone who truly saw and valued her. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony in Durango, with the schoolchildren serving as witnesses and cheering when Dalton kissed his bride. Willa had decided to return to Durango and continue teaching, at least for a while, and Dalton had spoken to his boss about taking a position closer to town so he could be with his wife more often. The ranch owner, a pragmatic man who valued good workers, had agreed to give Dalton a job managing the horses and livestock at the main ranch, which meant he would be home nearly every night instead of spending months in the high country. It was a change for Dalton, but one he embraced gladly. His days of wandering alone in the mountains were over. Now he had Willa, and she was worth any sacrifice. Their first months of marriage were an adjustment for both of them. Willa was accustomed to living alone, managing her own life without input from anyone else. Dalton was used to the independence of the trail, making decisions without having to consider another person. But they worked through the rough patches with patience and communication, learning each other's habits and preferences, building a life together one day at a time. Willa continued teaching through the spring and into the summer, and Dalton worked at the ranch, returning home each evening to the small house they rented near the school. In the evenings they would sit together on the porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains, talking about their days, planning for the future. "I have been thinking," Willa said one evening in early June, "perhaps I might take a year away from teaching. I could always return later if I wanted, but I would like time to settle into married life, to maybe fix up my father's house in Silverton and decide what to do with it." "You do not have to stop teaching for me," Dalton said. "I know how much it means to you." "It does mean something to me, but so do you. And I think I have been teaching partially because I needed the structure and purpose it gave my life when I had little else. Now I have you, and that changes things. I want time to just be your wife, to figure out who we are together without the constant demands of the schoolhouse. If that is what you want, then I support you completely. Willa took his hand. There is another reason I have been thinking about taking time away from teaching. Oh. What is that? I am with child. Dalton went very still. Then he turned to her, his eyes wide. Truly, you are certain? The doctor confirmed it yesterday. I am about 2 months along, which means the baby should arrive sometime in January. A slow smile spread across Dalton's face, and then he let out a whoop of joy that probably woke half the neighborhood. He pulled Willa into his arms, holding her gently as though she might break. A baby, he said wonderingly. We are going to have a baby. Are you happy? Happy. Willa, I am beyond happy. I never thought I would have a family again after losing my mother and sister. Now I have you and a child on the way. I am the luckiest man alive. They held each other as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, both of them overwhelmed by the gift they had been given. A baby. A new life. The promise of a future they would build together. Willa did take leave from teaching, and they spent the summer and fall preparing for the baby's arrival. They moved into a larger house with an extra room for the nursery, and Dalton spent his spare time building a cradle and other furniture. Willa sewed tiny clothes and blankets, marveling at how small they were, imagining the little person who would wear them. As her pregnancy progressed, Dalton became increasingly protective, insisting she rest more and let him handle the heavy work around the house. Willa protested at first, unwilling to be treated as fragile, but eventually she accepted his care as the expression of love it was. He had nearly lost her once on that mountain trail. He was not going to risk her health now. In late January of 1882, during another Colorado winter storm, Willa went into labor. Dalton fetched the doctor and then paced the house like a caged animal while Willa labored in their bedroom. The hours stretched endlessly, and Dalton thought he might lose his mind waiting, but finally he heard the strong cry of a newborn. The doctor emerged from the bedroom, smiling. You have a son, Mr. Ellis, a healthy boy. Your wife did beautifully. Dalton rushed into the bedroom to find Willa sitting up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in a blue blanket. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. Come meet your son, she said softly. Dalton sat carefully on the edge of the bed, gazing down at the tiny face peeking from the blanket. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was squinting at the world with unfocused eyes. He was perfect. What should we name him? Dalton asked, unable to look away from his son. I was thinking we could name him Edward, after my father, and perhaps his middle name could be Daniel, after yours. Dalton's own father had been named Daniel, though Dalton rarely spoke of him given how he had died. But hearing Willa suggest the name touched something deep in his heart. Edward Daniel Ellis. It is perfect. The baby, whom they called Eddie from the start, was a good-natured child who rarely fussed and seemed content to observe the world around him with solemn eyes. Dalton proved to be a devoted father, rising in the night for feedings, walking the floor when Eddie was restless, spending hours simply holding his son and marveling at the miracle of him. You are wonderful with him, Willa observed one evening, watching Dalton rock Eddie to sleep. I want to be the father mine never was. I want Eddie to grow up knowing he is loved and valued, that his home is a safe place. He will know that. You are already giving him what you never had. As Eddie grew from an infant to a toddler, Willa and Dalton settled into the rhythms of family life. Willa returned to teaching part-time when Eddie was 2, bringing him with her to the schoolhouse, where the older students delighted in helping watch the youngest Ellis. Dalton continued working at the ranch, but made sure he was home every evening for supper with his family. They had decided to keep her father's house in Silverton and spend a few weeks there each summer, maintaining the property and visiting the graves of Willa's parents. It became a tradition, these summer trips to the mountains, and Eddie loved exploring the hills and learning about the wildlife from his father. 2 years after Eddie's birth, Willa gave birth to twin girls they named Mary and Rose. The twins were lively and mischievous from the start, keeping their parents on their toes but filling the house with laughter. Dalton expanded the house to accommodate their growing family, adding bedrooms and a larger kitchen. "You ever think about that day on the mountain?" Willa asked one evening when the children were finally asleep and they had a rare moment of quiet together. "When the avalanche came, sometimes," Dalton admitted. "Usually when the snow starts falling and I remember how close we came to dying. I think about it often. I think about how my entire life changed in that moment when you grabbed me and pulled me onto your horse. Everything I have now, everything we have built together, exists because you risked your life for someone you did not even know. I would do it again in a heartbeat. Saving you was the best decision I ever made. I whispered why me when you first pulled me to safety. Do you remember?" "I remember. And you said I was worth it. At the time I did not really believe you. I did not see myself as worth much of anything. But you have spent every day since then showing me my worth, showing me that I deserve to be loved and valued. You gave me back myself, Dalton." He pulled her close. "You did the same for me. I was just existing before I met you, going through the motions of life without any real purpose or joy. You gave me a reason to build something instead of just surviving. You gave me a family, a home, a future. I am the one who should be grateful." "Then I suppose we are both grateful," Willa said, snuggling against him. "Both of us saved each other." The years passed in a blur of ordinary happiness. Eddie grew tall and serious, with his father's calm demeanor and his mother's love of learning. The twins were whirlwinds of energy, constantly getting into mischief, but showing signs of the kind hearts they inherited from both parents. When Eddie was 8 and the twins were 6, Willa gave birth to their 4th and final child, a daughter they named Emily after Dalton's sister. Little Emily was quiet and observant, and she adored her older siblings, following them everywhere they would allow. Dalton often reflected on how full his life had become. The loneliness that had defined his 30s was a distant memory, replaced by the joyful chaos of 4 children and a wife he loved more with each passing year. He had built the family he thought he had lost forever when his mother and sister died, and he treasured every moment. As the children grew, Willa told them the story of how their parents met, how their father had saved their mother from an avalanche and waited with her through a storm. The children never tired of hearing it, especially the part where their father said their mother was worth saving. "Is that when you fell in love?" Mary asked during one such retelling. "I think I started falling in love the moment he pulled me onto his horse," Willa admitted, "though it took a few days for me to realize it. I fell in love when I saw her sitting in that lined shack wrapped in blankets, so determined to reach her father even though she had nearly died," Dalton added. "She was the bravest person I had ever met." "Will you tell us about the avalanche again?" Rose pleaded. So they would tell the story again, each time emphasizing the importance of kindness, of helping others, of recognizing that every life has value. They wanted their children to grow up understanding that love and compassion were strengths, not weaknesses. The years continued to pass. Eddie grew into a young man who wanted to study medicine, inspired by the doctor who had cared for his grandfather in Silverton. The twins became inseparable young women who shared their mother's love of teaching and began helping at the schoolhouse. Little Emily, true to her thoughtful nature, developed a talent for drawing and painting, capturing the beauty of the Colorado mountains in her art. Dalton and Willa grew older together, their hair graying and their bodies showing the wear of hard work and raising 4 children. But their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened with the years, becoming something solid and enduring, tested by time and proven true. They still traveled to Silverton each summer, though now they brought children and eventually grandchildren with them. The house that had been Edward Wright's became a gathering place for the Ellis family, filled with laughter and love and the stories of generations. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Dalton took Willa back to the line shack where they had sheltered from the storm. It was summer now, and the mountains were green and alive instead of buried in snow. They stood together looking out at the view, remembering. "You have any regrets?" Dalton asked, taking her hand. "None. You? Only that I did not meet you sooner, but then maybe we met exactly when we were meant to. Maybe everything happened exactly as it needed to so we would find each other. I think you are right. If I had not been traveling to see my father, if that avalanche had not happened exactly when it did, if you had not been on that mountain at that precise moment, we might never have met. Every piece had to fall into place just so. Fate, Dalton said, or luck, or divine providence. Whatever you want to call it, I am grateful." They stood there a while longer, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built a life together out of love and determination. The mountains around them stood eternal and unchanging, witness to their story. As they rode back to Silverton that evening, Willa thought about the young woman she had been 20 years ago, alone and lonely, and convinced that her life would always be solitary. How wrong she had been. How glad she was to have been wrong. The years continued their steady march. Eddie married and became a doctor, setting up practice in Durango where he could be close to his family. The twins both became teachers, carrying on their mother's legacy. Emily married a rancher and moved to a spread near Colorado Springs, where she continued painting and raising horses. Dalton and Willa became grandparents, then grandparents many times over as their children built their own families. Their house remained a hub of family activity, with children and grandchildren constantly coming and going, bringing noise and life and joy. When Dalton was 58 and Willa was 54, they took one last trip to the site where they had met. It was winter again, though not as harsh as that January day nearly 30 years ago. They stood on a rise overlooking the place where the avalanche had occurred, where Dalton had risked everything to save a stranger. "I think about all the lives that exist because of what you did that day," Willa said, watching snowflakes drift lazily from the sky. "Our children, our grandchildren, the students I taught over the years, all of those lives trace back to your choice to save me instead of saving yourself. I told you then that you were worth it. That has never changed. And I told you that you were worth it too. Worth loving, worth building a life with, worth growing old beside. I meant that then, and I mean it now." They held each other in the winter stillness, 2 people who had found love in the most unlikely of circumstances and nurtured it into something beautiful and lasting. The mountains around them stood silent and strong, guardians of their love story. Dalton lived to be 73, still strong and vital until a heart attack took him quickly one summer evening. He was in the garden with Willa when it happened, and his last words were to tell her he loved her. She held him as he died, grateful that he did not suffer, devastated by the loss of her partner of 40 years. The funeral was well attended. Their 4 children came with their families, and what seemed like half of Durango turned out to pay respects to a man who had been known for his kindness, his integrity, and his devotion to his family. They buried him in the Durango cemetery with a view of the mountains he had loved so much. Willa lived another 10 years after Dalton's death, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. She never remarried, content to live with her memories of the love she had shared with Dalton. She spent her final years telling stories to the youngest generation, making sure they knew about the grandfather who had saved their grandmother from an avalanche, and in doing so had created the family they were all part of. When Willa died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 84, they buried her next to Dalton. Her gravestone read, "Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and teacher," but the family knew the truth. She had been so much more than those simple titles suggested. She had been the heart of their family, the center around which they all revolved, the living proof that love could flourish even in the harshest conditions if tended with care. The family gathered after her funeral, sharing memories and stories, and inevitably someone brought up the avalanche. The story had been told so many times it had taken on the quality of legend, but at its heart was a simple truth. Sometimes one moment of courage and compassion can change everything. Sometimes saving one life means saving many. Eddie, now a grandfather himself, stood and raised his glass. "To my parents," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "who taught us that every life has value, that love is worth fighting for, and that the choices we make matter. They started with nothing but each other and built something extraordinary. May we all be so lucky, so brave, and so wise." The family echoed his toast, glasses raised to two people who had lived well and loved deeply, and left behind a legacy that would endure for generations. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, soft and gentle, covering the Colorado mountains in white. Somewhere up in those mountains was a lined shack where two people had once sheltered from a storm and discovered they were meant to be together. Somewhere up there was a place where an avalanche had brought death, but ultimately created life. The story of Dalton and Willa Ellis became part of the family history, told and retold with each generation. The details might vary slightly with each telling, but the essential truth remained constant. Love found in unexpected places, nurtured with care and respect, protected and cherished, could weather any storm. It could survive avalanches and loss and all the challenges life presented. And at the heart of the story was always that moment when Willa, pulled from the path of certain death, had whispered, "Why me?" And Dalton had answered with perfect certainty, "Because you are worth it." Those words became a family motto of sorts, passed down through generations. When someone was struggling or doubting themselves, someone else would remind them, "You are worth it. Worth saving, worth loving, worth fighting for." It was the gift Dalton had given Willa on that mountainside, and the gift they had together given to their children and grandchildren and all who came after. In the end, that is what endured beyond the years and the memories and even the people themselves. The simple truth that every life has value, that love is always worth the risk, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is reach out to save someone else, even if it means risking everything yourself. Because in saving others, we often save ourselves. In recognizing someone else's worth, we discover our own. And in choosing love over fear, we create something that outlasts our own brief time on Earth. That is the legacy of Dalton Ellis and Willa Wright Ellis, a cowboy and a teacher who met in the most dramatic of circumstances and built a love story for the ages. Their descendants still live in Colorado, still visit that cemetery in Durango, still tell the story of the avalanche and the lined shack, and the moment two strangers became everything to each other. And every time the story is told, every time someone whispers, "Why me?" about the good fortune or the challenges in their life, someone else is there to answer, because you are worth it. Those words, spoken with love and conviction and absolute certainty, continue to echo through time, a reminder of what matters most in this brief and precious life we are given. Not wealth or status or fame, but the connections we make, the love we share, and the courage to reach out to others even when it costs us something. That is the true story of the Avalanche, the cowboy, and the woman he saved. A story of love and redemption, and the power of human connection to transform lives. A story that began with one moment of bravery on a mountainside and rippled outward across decades, touching hundreds of lives and creating a legacy that will endure as long as the mountains themselves stand tall against the Colorado sky.